5 Live Boxing.
It's big fight week, and what a fight it is. Conor Benn against Chris Eubank Jr. at the O2. It's sold out in minutes, and what a year it's been. We've had fights in Cardiff. We've had 95,000 people at Wembley. We've been out in Saudi Arabia. It's been one of the greatest years for British fights, and this will continue the tradition. And what a tradition it is. It's a bloodline fighting tradition, because their fathers fought each other in 1990 and then again in 1993. And the man who put those fights together is a man called Barry Hearn. He had this young fighter called Christopher Livingston Eubank. And in this building behind me, I'm in Essex, in the Essex countryside. This building is called Maskell's. It's Matchroom's headquarters. Somewhere inside here was where Barry Hearn and Chris Eubank sat down to mastermind a fight with Nigel Benn. What a time that was. I'm going to go and sit down somewhere in here with Barry Hearn, and unashamedly, I'm going to spend the next 40 or so minutes reminiscing about that first fight in 1990, and then the rematch in front of 42,000 people at Old Trafford, and then look forward to this Saturday. What a business. I'm Steve Bunce, and this is 5 Live Boxing. Barry, before we start, I've got to ask you the question that lots of people have asked me to ask you, and it's quite simple. And I don't take it the wrong way. How are the book sales going with regards to
I'm
Eddie's?
getting slaughtered. I'm getting slaughtered, mate. I mean, I can't compete. My book is so much better than Eddie's.
No, I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
It's a comic compared with a classic. But I don't have his social media following. I don't have the Eddie's army of punters out there that blindly follow down the Eddie Hearn path. I'm not jealous or bitter or twisted in any way. I hate him. I want to burn every single one of his books on Hampstead Heath.
And are you still, would it be a big fire?
Yeah.
It's out of print.
Well, in comparison to how many he sold, how many I've sold, it's an enormous fire.
And are you still touring the country?
I'm still
doing
available
stuff?
for the opening of an envelope. I have no pride at all, as my wife tells me. But I feel as if I'm on a mission to educate the entire world to what is a literary classic.
Well, listen, if it's a small consolation, but I love it. I think it's true.
Thank you, Bunce.
And
you have no idea what it means to me at this time in my life, and the success I've achieved over the years, the fortune I've accumulated, the assets I've developed, to know that Bunce likes my book. Put it in context, that's probably the biggest news I've had in my entire life.
And what's more, I bought a copy of it, by the way. So
that is the most staggering thing I've ever heard. Because you know, Bunce, you would have had a freebie.
No, I've got a freebie, but I actually bought a copy.
Staggeringly loyal. I'm touched. I'm almost moved to tears.
Well, listen, hold your tears back.
Okay.
I'm going to take you down, hopefully down memory lane today.
You are, obviously.
We're getting closer and closer to the sons, Conor and Chris Eubank Jr. boxing each other, fighting each other, whatever we want to call it, at the O2. But I want to take you back, not to just the first fight between the fathers in November of 1990. I want to take you back to that summer. Because obviously Nigel was in America defending against Iran Barkley, and Chris was having various fights. Kid Milo at the Brighton Conference Centre,
Ronaldo dos Santos.
But I also found a great little snippet that, and I'd forgotten about this completely, and I hope you haven't. But a plan that you had to put Chris on in the late summer against Mike McCullum at Brighton and Hove Football Stadium. What's the story? I mean,
there was just so many. Look, you've got to, if you go back in time now, and at this stage the mist comes down on the TV screen, doesn't it? And some light music as you go back into time.
I've seen that, Doc.
And you've got to put yourself in the position we were in. So it's 1990. We're just coming out of a recession that was brutal for our business. Sky have just appeared on our scene, Sky B, etc., making noises. Eurosport will begin to develop. There was a little light at the end of the tunnel, but the biggest part of this light was Christopher Livingston Eubank, who was developing an unbeaten career, attracting quite a lot of media interest because of the type of person he was, being promoted, as always, by the mouth from the south, saying he was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Did he know what he was talking about? The young Bazza? Certainly not. Why should he change a lifetime of talking nonsense? But there was an opportunity. And one thing that I'm extremely good at is making the most of God's given luck and having the opportunity. So we looked at 1,000 different things, but we had one big problem. Christopher Livingston Eubank himself, because he was intransigent in how he wanted his career to be developed. The golden rules, the 3 golden rules which made him successful was no southpaws, no one under 25, and no one undefeated. So we were looking and scraping the surface to try and find that big fight that would take him from being an interesting prospect to a household name. And of course, one of the names that came up, because Mike McCullum was a great fighter in those days. He'd beaten Steve Collins in Boston. I saw the fight. Obviously, the fight against Michael Watson showed how good he was. And he also ticked the boxes on the other levels. But, of course, it was a massive fight to try and put together. And Eubank didn't really have that marketing value at that stage.
At that point.
No, he was someone, they said, well, who's the bloke with the lisp? Oh, he looks a bit funny. He jumps in the ring when he boxes. He knocks people out occasionally, depending on the level they were. He wasn't the greatest concussive attacking puncher. So it was one of the many ideas we had to try and get into that superstardom level, which failed for whatever reason. The other fight we was looking at was Michael Nunn, but he got beat on two out of 3 of the ticks, you know. So we were struggling, and the obvious choice, but I didn't know that Benn was going to come back from the States because he was doing so well in the States. He'd had 3 or 4 fights out there. The Barclay fight was a big one. Doug DeWitt was another big one, and he was a very attractive. I didn't know we'd get him back, but that was the obvious fight to make to achieve 2 objectives: 1, to fight for a world title, and 2, to give Chris Eubank the platform to potentially go on to be one of the greats.
And the first conversations with Nigel's people, where did they take place? I mean, I'm assuming it was Ambrose Mendy?
Ambrose Mendy. I mean, really, Ambrose was a ducker and diver. I mean, he is still to this day. I mean, God bless, he's still around, same as me.
Still at ringside.
Well, he will be if we give him a ticket. He's a character, and Ambrose Mendy could have been the English version of Don King had he stayed on the straight and narrow for a little bit longer. He's a very intelligent guy and quite smart, but in some ways he's not smart at all. So that's the conundrum with Ambrose Mendy. But Ambrose was always one for looking for the opportunity, and our paths would cross occasionally. He would have little sautés into Stratford and the East End of London to meet all his mates. Occasionally we'd bump into each other and we'd always talk boxing. Sure. And of course he had the interest with Nigel Benn. Bob Arum obviously was the main man in terms of he had the contract with Benn. But Ambrose Mendy really fancied the Eubank fight. There's no doubt.
That's what I want to talk about.
He thought the fight was a pretty one-way street for his man.
Easy.
So easy fight. And all he was doing was just being nice to me to make sure that I paid as much money as he could get out of me for Nigel Benn, which he achieved. I paid him £300,000, which in those days, as today, but good boxing money. Seems to have gone crazy at the moment, but in those days it was very good money. And
that actual fight, once it took off, did it surprise you how it took off? Or am I imagining that it was instantly big? Because that can happen.
No, it grew throughout the promotion. It was instantly large.
Yeah.
In terms of the NEC is not the biggest venue. I think it only held about 8,000, I think, out of memory. The tickets sold pretty well straight away. Not to the point of view where there was people paying exorbitant prices over and above.
They didn't sell in 4 minutes.
No, it wasn't one of those. It probably sold in 4 weeks. But when people thought about it, and obviously, but it burned like an Agatha Christie novel. You didn't know whether the butler really did it until the last chapter. But there was loads of little twists, and the twists all came through the press conferences, the dialogue between the fighters, the real hate is a strong word, but it wasn't far off.
Applicable.
It was applicable to that fight, and that got the public's interest. And of course, in those days, don't forget the massive difference was ITV free to air. You know, so every promo was seen by millions upon millions of people. So it was a lot easier in those days than it is today, where the promotion is predominantly on social media rather than linear television.
Now, at what point during either the press conferences or fight week did you realise there was something very special? Not just a really good fight that had done good business.
I think
when did it really take off?
The real time it really... I mean, I always thought it was big.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong, and I'm always optimistic. And I looked at my budgets, because I always do, and I couldn't see any way I could do much better than break even. So I wasn't looking at this as a financial gain. I was looking at this as... this is our moment. This was the Steve Davis moment from the Crucible.
10 years earlier.
Where we were going to fast track ourselves into the big time. And that was the most exciting thing. You know, it was coming out of recession, thinking, if I don't make some money soon, I'm not going to be around much longer. It was hard in the late 80s. And as I say, suddenly the TV scenario landscape looked different. Suddenly there was a bit more optimism, a bit more of a bounce in your step. Your shoulders were back, your chin was down, your head was up. And suddenly I had this big fight where I actually thought, I believe we have the style to win this fight. And that was the motivation. In the same way as I thought Davis had the game to beat Doug Mountjoy 10 years before and to jettison me into the big time, if you like. This was my moment. I didn't realise... No, I wasn't so nervous because actually, you see, my life was a lot easier than, say, my son's. I had nothing to beat. You know, I had nothing to beat. So win, lose or draw, well, it is what it is, mate, and we'll get on with it and we'll move on. You know, I didn't have my dad's fortunes to lose or my dad's reputation to...
Or 754 people working in that.
I know, I remember. I looked the other day, you know, and I thought when I was running boxing at Matchroom, there was me, Johnny Wish...
Yeah. Steve?
No, but I think there was me plus 4. I think it's Eddie plus 51 at the moment. I mean, it's a bit, even if they all bought his book, it's not going to make it. Let's stop talking about that book.
Please.
But, so this was the big moment, selfishly for me, obviously for Eubank, but I didn't realise the intensity of the fight until that first press conference with Nick Owen, Eubank that refused... and he made his own mind up, refused to look at Nigel Benn in the face. He just turned away from him, if you remember the press conference. And he spent his whole time... and I thought it was good, but I didn't know he was going to continue out throughout the whole of the press conference. And he said, I have plenty of time to look at his face when I'm hitting it. And I thought, ooh, that's a bit near the mark. And Nigel became this volcano that started deep under the earth's crust and bubbled, and it came up through his throat via his heart and his testicles, and it spit absolute lava, red-hot lava. When it came out, he wanted to kill him then, and you could feel the atmosphere in the room. I think Saturday's fight is a great, great fight. I don't feel it has that basic intensity because I think we've got two really nice young men. Yeah. You know, I mean, I'll say that. Nigel Benn wasn't nice. No. Nigel Benn was a character from the street. He wanted to hurt people badly. Chris Eubank wasn't nice. He was selfish. He believed in his own ability and he wanted to treat this ruffian to a lesson in the pugilistic skills. I won't do the list because other people do it poorly. I don't want to join that clan. But it was the contrast between the two personalities was so evident that it was one of those things where you actually wanted to get out of the room because you felt uncomfortable, where you undid your tie, you undid your top button on your shirt because you were getting that uncomfortable warm feeling. You know, sometimes you're in a room and someone will be embarrassing you or something like that and you think, I don't really want to be here. And then you can't not be there. It was like walking through treacle.
The rivalry took on a life of its own in many ways because it clearly wasn't. You didn't sit down with Chris one day and plot it, and Ambrose didn't sit down with Nigel one day and plot it. It evolved. It was.
I think
organic.
Ambrose was the big plotter. without doubt. I mean, Ambrose was the one that said, let's give Eubank a really dressing room. Yeah. Let's give him dirty towels. Let's spoil his music.
Yeah, spoil his music.
You know, all of that sort of thing. He's got Ambrose. I'm guessing.
It's all over.
But he's got his handwriting all over it. Mind games were Ambrose's specialty, and I always fall for mind games because I'm so easily conned. Eubank didn't. Eubank was so focused on, let's just get in that ring and smack this geezer and change my life.
In the build-up to the fight, did you ever go down and spend any time with Eubank when he was training?
I didn't. I never watched him train. Because there's not a lot of point, because I don't think he ever showed anyone when he trained properly. I think he did most of it behind closed doors, I went down to see him to make sure his head was right, and he was always good.
That was in the basement, the underground gym. Ronnie Davis.
But most of the time, we'd be in his study just talking. Yeah. You know, I don't need to see a fighter train. These fighters are good. What am I? Realistically, what am I going to add to that? Absolutely. Nothing. When we talk about money, planning, we talk about strategy. Sometimes a little bit about mind games as well. Then I can perhaps add something. But if I can't add anything, there's no point in me wasting my time.
On the night itself, as the fight unfolds, and it's savage, it's brutal from the opening bell. They both mean it. Going into the ninth round, Eubank doesn't have a great eighth round as such, but Nigel his left eye's gone, and he's finished. Can you try and recapture for me that moment, that last round, where it's that bittersweet thing where Benn's fight and is over, his camp's broken, but you're absolutely exhausted. Can you try and remember?
Yeah, I mean, you throw your mind back. I mean, first off, you have to understand the personality of the people involved, including myself. I am one of the world's great optimists. As far as I'm concerned, I can't lose anything. I just can't lose. I'm always right. And of course, I'm not always right, but your mindset is. So going into the fight, I had completely brainwashed myself to think we win this fight comfortably. I think styles make fights. I saw Benn as the aggressor. I saw Eubank as the counter-puncher. I saw Eubank having the last word, having the last punch. And all I saw was a shutout victory for Eubank. I'd underestimated Benn, of course, but having said that, I was probably right that the styles do make fights. And Nigel Benn was made for Eubank in a way that Michael Watson wasn't made for Eubank, because Watson was a clever fighter, Nigel was just power and desire and, he's the type of bloke you wouldn't want to go near without a lump of wood in your hand, if you've got any sense at all. But Eubank was a pugilist of the old school training. So the opening, I remember turning to Bob Arum when the bell went for first round and they hadn't got any options on the future. Oh, schoolboy era. Especially we weren't the mandatory. We were an optional.
Yeah. You forced the fight.
And Ambrose Mendy said, Bob Arum said, we haven't got any options. And as the bell went, I went, no, I won't use his language, but, I said...
He wasn't happy.
You're in trouble, mate, here. You're done. And Ambrose Mendy said we didn't need any options because he was super confident.
Of course he was.
As soon as the fight went on, it was strong. The only danger you had was that Eubank bottled it and swallowed it in awe of the power and ferocity of Nigel Benn, and he wasn't going to do that because that wasn't his nature. So it progressed as I muchly expected it. I thought it would be hard, of course. I think it was harder than I thought, but towards the 6th, 7th round, you started seeing facial damage on Benn. Eubank seemed to catch him with cleaner punches on the way in. I mean, Benn was still that snarling animal that he was in the ring. But it's always nice when you think, you can see, as I say, the light at the end of the tunnel. As it gets really close, you realise it's not a train. It's not a train coming towards me. It's actually the opening to the land of milk and honey. Yeah. And suddenly, in the same way as Davis was in the Crucible in 81, the penny drops, the stops, and you realise, Jesus Christ, I was right. We are going to win. And, you're probably more astonished because you're used to yourself talking rubbish day in, day out, and suddenly you think, blimey, blimey, I was right. And you watched, as the tide comes in, and King Canute is sitting on that throne in the Norfolk coastline, you can't stop it. And boxing's like that. Sometimes you just feel it's inevitable, but it's not quite there yet. So 6 and 7, 8 wasn't a great round. 8 was the last hurrah, in my view, from Nigel.
Benn's last stand.
And probably coupled with the fact that I believe behind the scenes he had a huge problem making the weight. Yeah. And usually by that 7 or 8 round, that starts to come across in your and the heart goes out of you a little bit because of exhaustion. Was I surprised when Richard Steele jumped in? A little bit, because I think Benn was still competitive at that stage, although I think it was a good stoppage.
It was a lost cause, but he was still competing, yeah.
But having said that, then you get this surge of adrenaline. Unless people have been the biggest sports promoter in the world for 30 or 40 years, they won't understand what that surge is like. But let me tell you, I've never tried unofficial or official drugs, but none of them. I don't care how good they make you feel or whatever. Nothing can compete with that surge of adrenaline with the "we've only gone and bloody done it." And then all you want to do then is jump in the ring. You want to hug your man. You want to get adrenaline, blood, sweat all over a very expensive suit, and you don't care. So it's something special, and it doesn't happen very often in your life. I mean, I've been fortunate to have a few occasions. The intensity of that win was right up there with the same level of adrenaline rush I got when Davis won the World Snooker Championships. I think it was probably bigger than when Joshua won the World Heavyweight title because, again, different circumstances. Yeah. I didn't respect Charles Taylor as much as I did Nigel Benn. So the feeling of... And it wasn't just relief. It was that feeling of this journey is now about to start properly. Fill your boots, Bazza.
And it did with over 20 world title fights. But let me ask you a simple question, Barry. Why did it take so long for the rematch? Because they both had an awful lot of fights, and Nigel had some great fights. We were out in Italy. Why did it take so long? It was 93.
Lots of different reasons. I think obviously Eubank went from Eubank was always a businessman as well as a boxer. I mean, the same way as a lot of fighters are today. AJ is a businessman more than a fighter, or not more than, but a serious businessman. Tyson Fury is the same. So you have to look into the guy. When you had a ferocious assault like that on you for 9 rounds, when you've had your tongue split, the respect overwhelms the hate or the mutual disregard. And I don't think either of them particularly wanted to go through that again if there were alternatives. Well, for Eubank, there were a lot of alternatives because ITV had a big audience winner. They were very happy to see Eubank out constantly. Eubank, providing the opponents ticked his 3 boxes, was very happy to box all the time and make good money. So there was the public demand, but most importantly, there wasn't the demand from the fighters themselves. So you didn't see Nigel Benn, Ambrose Mendy, Bobo. You didn't see them clambering for a rematch or another one or any excuses about. There was no excuses whatsoever from the Nigel Benn camp. He never mentioned weight. He never mentioned any reason why he got beat, other than the fact he did get on the night, got beaten by the better man, which is always the greatest thing to acknowledge. So the demand actually only built as perhaps you might criticise some of Eubank's opponents as being not really commercial enough to maintain this commercial bandwagon that was called Christopher Livingston Eubank Limited. It had to come again, obviously. But most of these fights, don't we see how long? No fight takes place as quick as fans want it, and I don't think we need to say more on that subject with Fury Joshua going on, do we? It's not an easy world, and despite what people say, these idiots that have their opinions of oh, it's what the fans want. No. Listen, it's what the boxers want that counts.
So I'm just going to talk you through, if we can just go through the second fight, 42,000 at Theatre of Dreams, Old Trafford. It's a fight that obviously didn't have the savagery and intensity of the first fight, but it's still a really hard fight. Yeah. It's still a really grueling fight. It's an intense fight, the rematch.
It was a fight that took place with the knowledge and support of both boxers for monetary gain, obviously, as it always is in boxing, but where both fighters weren't as committed to the cause in the second fight, mainly because they knew what they were going to have to go through if they were going to replicate that second fight. It never replicated the intensity, but strategically, structurally, technically, it was a good fight.
It was a really good fight.
It's just that they both knew a bit more about each other. So there was none of this, let's go and see if I can rip his head off.
They'd been there already.
Because Ben knew he couldn't.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a question of Eubank saying, my boxing skills will beat him, because Ben had improved and learned. So it was a really, really tough fight to score. It was interesting. It never had me on the edge of my seat. Sure. But at the same time, I always score fights, Buncey, probably wrongly, same as you. I've listened to some of your quotes.
I'm bad. I'm bad sometimes.
Sometimes I'm not in the same room. I scored it a draw. So I mean, at least I got one right.
One of the three. After that fight, and with the way the business went on, did we ever get close to a third fight? And did Eubank ever pester you for a third fight?
No. I mean, we never got close because of, obviously, the management changed. Yeah. I mean, I had, great relationship with both fighters. Don King got involved, quite rightly. He paid me a lot of money to get involved. And, again, he messed up because his contract wasn't good enough he wanted to have both fighters, but he specified win or lose. He never put the draw in the contract. Well, I did the contract, so I'm not surprised. So there was a lot of animosity. And at that time, there was animosity in boxing. Boxing's quite a small business. It's quite a small world, really.
It's a nice little village.
It is a lovely village. Yeah. And there's very few bullies in the village, and there was me and Warren probably, didn't like each other necessarily, wanted to be the top man in boxing. I was never that bothered. I wanted to be top man, but not just boxing. But they had their own plans. Don King was really upset with me when he realised he didn't have both boxers. So that was unfortunate. That was a sort of 2 years or so where he wouldn't talk to me. And I think he went into business with Frank and they had an interesting, shall we say, experience along the way.
Absolutely.
A part of it was very successful and it ended in tears with the Nazim Hamed lawsuit, which Don King won. So those type of partners are an acquired art, and I'd rather leave them out of my life because I like an easy life. But there wasn't the demand. I think they were more concentrating on trying to put me out of business generally in boxing, because they felt that I'd cheated them, which, of course, I hadn't, but depends how you interpret a contract. It's easier if you read a contract to make sure you can interpret it properly, but that's another story. But nevertheless, they went their own different ways. Again, the third fight would have, and it's easy for me to say this, would have been the fight of the centuries, because then they knew enough to know that if they really wanted to win it, they had to go back into that cauldron and risk everything.
Ouch.
Eubank was much more an analytical fighter when it came to opponents. Nigel was an emotional fighter when it came to opponents. I think Nigel would have taken fight 3 in those days, and Eubank would have looked at what's the alternatives, because he's a businessman. And there were plenty of alternatives. As we went on to with the Sky contract, we had a lot more freedom with that, which again, with fight fans will probably look back and say, well, they weren't great fights, but they were great fights if you were Chris Eubank or Barry Hearn, or Sky Television with their subscribers. We came round to it. It would have had to happen at one stage, but then Steve Collins put his nose in and beat Eubank, and that attractiveness of that third fight diminished as Nigel was still on his own path and doing very well as well. So I mean, look, we're talking about the careers of two great greats, two great fighters.
Let's not forget that.
Let's not forget that. And put it in context that theirs was at a time where there wasn't the multi-million pound contracts. There wasn't the pay-per-view. Had pay-per-view existed, which is always my dream. As we saw pay-per-view come in, my dream was always to do Benn Eubank 3 as the first pay-per-view in this country. Did we get close? Not really, but that would have set numbers that the rest of the world would have just chased forever.
And you're right about that third fight. It would have given us the best of both of the other fights, and there would have been, maybe the word's not desperate, but they would have
but
pushed
you've only got to look at great other trilogies. So if you want to say, what was the best fight? I mean, I always thought that Ali Frazier 3 was the best fight of both of them. I think Ali Frazier 1 was a good fight, and 2 was similar. Arturo Gatti against Mickey Ward, I thought the third fight again was better, because by then they knew each other so well, great fighters, that you really just got who was the best man, and that made for an exciting fight.
It's that old cliche, they were fighting for the championship of themselves.
And I think that's pride. When pride comes in, it's a crazy world, because you don't value pride and you don't value your own health or safety. It's something much deeper.
But we have got quite a hefty degree of pride going into Saturday. Two very different boys in many ways. But
it's a fascinating fight.
It is.
But it's a different fight. I mean, because the fact that it's a catchweight contest, in some ways, takes away that gravitas of who's the best man, because it's going to be who is the best man that copes at the catchweight level. And that, whilst it's a fabulous fight, but that puts a different dimension on value in the fight, because it's not a level playing field. One way, I don't know who it's going to suit, by the way, but one way or another, it's not a level playing field.
It's not a given who it's going to suit. I mean, most people just jump instantly on, well, Eubank has to jump through hoops to get somewhere, but then in all fairness, Conor has to jump through some really mad hoops to get up near him. So it's two ways.
It's a fight where the odds on this fight, in my view, will change during the fight significantly. Because
once we see the size, if the size is a factor.
Clearly the opening rounds are dangerous in favour of Eubank as the naturally bigger man. What I don't know is, and I saw a post on social media today saying it's hard making this weight. I'm going to get a nutritionist in.
You've seen this,
the fight's next Saturday.
Yeah, but he's also eating half a kilo of steak.
Well, I did see that at the time. That to my mind was mind games. I don't believe that was possible.
Not at all.
No. But having said that, we're talking today less than a week away.
Absolutely.
You know, there's things on weight that the average, the non-boxing fans won't understand, Bunce, and you've seen it 1,000 times. There are times in a fight where to take off half a pound, which sounds insignificant, is the most difficult thing in the world. You start looking at, shall I cut my toenails?
Absolutely.
You start cutting your hair off. Yeah, I mean, I know it sounds bizarre, but that is a massive potential advantage. And I think Eubank Sr. has acknowledged that in some of his posts.
Comments, yeah.
You know. But, of course, you're dealing with a 33-year-old man who's going to make his own mind up and who's a professional athlete and who fights for a living. Conor Benn is much easier for him, obviously very easy for him to make the weight, and perhaps he'll be stronger at that weight than he was previously when he was trained, because he finds it very hard to make welterweight. Yep. But welterweight is 10 stone 7, you know. Here we're fighting at 150 something.
57 or whatever.
I'm not party to all the intricacies, so you'll tell me. But all I'm saying is the size difference makes it tough for Conor. Hitting the weight is obviously much tougher for Eubank. Which of those two will be the most significant is the most interesting part. I would imagine the longer it goes, the more it suits Conor Benn.
Assuming the weight loss and the rehydration clause has some kind of effect.
It has to have an effect because Eubank Jr. has only boxed at 160, really, in the last few years. I think how many years he's been below that.
About 17 years since he boxed anywhere near 156.
Well, then it's a struggle, and it's going to come into professionalism, and it's going to come into mind strength. If it comes in, I mean, Eubank Jr. is got the mindset to adjust, and he has his father's toughness, his teak toughness. He has his. I'm sure he'll have his father's heart as well, which is one of the reasons why Eubank Sr. is concerned. But he's going to have the power advantage in those early rounds until and if the weight
starts being a factor. Yeah. And finally, Barry, and thanks so much for once again giving us your time and opening up your offices here at Maskell's. When this was made, or when Eddie, your son, was about to make it, did he call you? Did he chat to you and say, guess what, Dad?
Well,
Won't believe what I'm about to put together here.
We talk 24/7.
Yeah, I know you do, yeah. Don't worry about that.
I mean, I think driving him mad sometimes, because I'm always hurry up. And Eddie is a lot more professional than I was. He's not so emotional. I just want to make things happen. Eddie's like, it's coming. But from a dialogue perspective in our family, apart from Sunday lunch, as the dinner plates...
No boxing then, son.
The wife says, any talk of business and your dinner's in the dog. Other than that, we talk 24/7. So I'm involved in terms of listening to what's happening.
Yeah.
But on the operation side, not involved at all, because it's horrible business. It's only people like you who'll ever get a living out of this business. I'm going to leave it. I prefer the darts. Everyone has a good time and we have some fun.
I'd prefer the darts as well. I just got lumbered with this.
No,
gig.
but this is the worst thing about it. Well, everyone always says to me, "What's your favourite? What's your favourite?" Look, on one night, on one moment, nothing competes with boxing. Nothing. And Saturday night may be one of those days, maybe, that we'll remember as long as we'll remember Ben Eubank won 32 years ago, when a 24-0 kid went out and changed his life and contributed to a significant change in mine on a night I'll never forget.
And I'll add to that and finish with, and in my opinion, changed British boxing. It went from black and white to colour. It's as simple as that. Barry?
Lots of changes emanated from that fight, not least the power of the talent to determine their rights to have proper purse, proper conditions, and most of all, proper respect. And whatever happens Saturday, respect is the key word we want to see come out of it at the end of the day.
Barry, it's been an absolute delight and pleasure once again to spend some time with you. Thanks so much. But I will say, good luck with the book. Please, good luck with the book.
I'm not talking about the book anymore, Bunce. I'm just reading it every night myself and saying, Bazza, what a book.